Let's turn in our Bibles to Genesis chapter 34. Genesis chapter 34. In the last song that we just sang, we sang that Jesus is the Lord of history. That God is the Lord of history. It means He is the author of history, which means He is in control of all things in history. We sang that He reigns. He is the authority. We sang that He's the way, the truth, and the life. Which means that absolutely everything that we face in this life, we need not to rely on ourselves, but we need to go to Him. Why not go to the one who is the way, the truth, and the life, who is the Lord of history, who reigns for our help, rather than rely on ourselves? And then in the second song it says, Christ our hope in life and death. Most certainly He's our hope in death. Our faith is most evident when we can face death with incredible joy because we believe His promise that He will take us to be with Him where He is. But one thing that we have more difficulty doing is trusting Him with our life. But if He's the way, the truth, and the life, if He's the Lord of history, if He's the one who reigns, then He is our hope in life. We can face life with confidence when we look to Him, obey Him and what He's revealed, and rely on Him rather than ourselves. And this fits perfect with the story this morning. We might look at this story in Scripture and wonder, what is it doing in here? Well, it tells us, it shows us, maybe not to this degree in all of our lives, it shows us what happens when He's not the Lord of our lives. It shows us what happens when we forget Him. One thing you'll note in this passage we're reading, there's not a single mention of God. There is only a reliance on self. There's a complete forgetting of what God has instructed them, what God's commanded them. And we are given these stories to remind us of the same thing over and over and over again. Each passage and narrative in the Bible does not teach us different things each time. I don't need to come up with some novel idea from every different verse each time. They teach the same things in different ways. They teach the same things in different ways that it might get through to us. This helps us to follow God in all of our different situations and circumstances. The different situations and circumstances that we have in Scripture help us to be able to identify the truth that comes out of it with the challenges that we face in our own lives. And we see this in the passage this morning. What's being communicated is not something that is new. It's something that has been repeated over and over and over again throughout Scripture up until this time. And we most certainly saw it profoundly in the life of Abraham and in the life of Isaac. And so now we see it in the life of Joseph and the life of his sons. So after returning to worshiping and settling in the promised land, we're presented with an account where there is no focus on God at all. None. It is an event that highlights man's weakness and sin without looking to or reliance on God for His guidance or intervention. And although we may not end up by experiencing the same things that you see here to the same degree, the truth is that it's the same for us. If we choose to walk through life not realizing that He is our hope in life, that He's the way, the truth, and the life, then we will experience what we can give by relying on ourselves. We'll experience the results of our own ways. We learn here what happens when we do not look to God to inform and guide our actions. You know, sometimes people just think, well, prayer is just the kind of the religious thing that we do. And we fail to realize the significance of prayer. For if we believe that God is alive and that God cares and that He's in control, then we must know that He hears us and will respond to us. He will. When we are in times of trouble and we do not know what to do, the first thing to do is not to try to figure it out on our own, is to go to Him in prayer. Call out to Him. We must not rely on our desires. We must not rely on our thinking. We must not rely on our ways, because He is the way, the truth, and the life, not us. And this is repeated in Scripture to emphasize the importance of setting our minds on God and relying on Him in our lives in all we do. It's why we are told in the New Testament to set our minds on things above rather than things in this world. Yes, we need to deal with the challenges and the things in this world, but how we do must be informed by God and done in reliance on God rather than our own ways. So follow along with me in Genesis chapter 34 as I read the entire script, the chapter, and just remember as we go through, just note that this is just all human. This is just all human. There is nothing really good in this passage at all. Nothing. And that's the purpose. That's the purpose, to make it clear to us that when we choose to do things in our own way and ignore God, there's nothing good that comes out of it. We too will have troubles in our life. So follow along with me as I read. It starts off with this. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry, because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it, and get property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price and a gift as you will, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife." The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister, Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and we will be gone." Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem. And the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, These men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us, to become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. And all who went out to the gate of his city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. On the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses they captured and plundered. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. But they said, Should he treat our sister like a prostitute? What we see here is a gross injustice committed by a pagan against one of God's chosen. This is a reality that has been experienced by many believers since. It happens and will continue to happen. Evil people do evil things. And people will respond evilly if they do so based on their own ways rather than God's. We long for justice, and it is right to seek it. We must seek it. However, as it says in the scriptures, we must not repay evil for evil in order to obtain justice. The means do not justify the ends. Doing such is not justice at all. It's called revenge. We are not able to obtain justice if we are not able to obtain justice by acting justly, we must call out to and rely on God to deliver it. He will repay. Everything that happened in this passage of Scripture had nothing to do with what God had previously revealed to them, anything about his ways or his character. It had everything to do with them addressing things the way they thought it ought to be done. Driven by anger, which doesn't produce anything good. As already mentioned, there's not a single mention of God in this account. Not one of the children of the promise act or respond in a way that is in obedience to our reliance on God, on reliance on God. They all act based on what flows from forgetting God as we live our lives. How often do we go about living our lives, making decisions without any regard to God and his ways? That's exactly what they were doing. Dinah did not do what she was supposed to do. Dinah did what she knew she was not to do. Jacob neglected to do what he knew he should do, and Jacob's sons perverted a covenant from God to exact revenge. They committed that they would even be one with the people when God said, "You're to be separate from the people." They lied. Clearly, their father Jacob, to a certain extent, is an example to them. Our children are watching. None of them were acting in faith. And it's like us. The best thing that we as parents can do is to demonstrate acting in faith to our children. But none of them, including Jacob, were acting in faith. Instead, Dinah acted foolishly, Jacob acted fearfully, and Jacob's sons acted in their fury. It's under these 3 points of foolishness, fearfulness, and fury that we are going to, through the lens of those 3 points, we're going to look at the passage here this morning. Foolishness, fearfulness, and fury is what characterized all the children of the promise here. First, when we go about our lives with no consideration for the commands of God, we act foolishly. This is what Dinah did. Jacob purchased land outside the city of Shechem from the sons of Hamor to build an altar to worship God. He then settled on this land. It was strategically located for trade. That was part of the appeal of the area, as we see later in the passage. Jacob and his camp had become comfortable there. They became comfortable in the land. During this time, Jacob's daughter by Leah, Dinah, estimated to be in her early 20s, decided to go out to see the women of the land. She was comfortable with them. It appears she was seeking or had friendships with the Canaanite women of Shechem. She wasn't worried about fellowship with them. She wasn't worried about the impact that might have. She wasn't worried about the fact that she was developing relationships and bonds with people that she shouldn't have been doing, and especially alone. God had already instructed them that they were not to have fellowship or partnership with those outside of the promise. She was to be separate from them. Her comfort with him caused her to ignore God's command and to leave the camp to go into the city alone to have fellowship with the women of the city. She did not deserve what would happen, nor was it her fault in any way whatsoever, but she acted foolishly. If I was to go on a walk in a major city in a very, very dangerous area, dressed to the nines with money falling out of my pockets in a back alley in the middle of the night, and I get mugged or I get killed, it's not my fault, but every single one of you would say, "Boy, you were stupid." No, it's not her fault. But by doing what she wanted to do, rather than obeying what God had already revealed to them, she exposed herself. She exposed herself. She acted foolishly. And we do this today when we seek to build friendships with those who do not share the same values. People who do not share the same values can't encourage us in any way in the faith. They only distract us from the faith. And again, we've heard this a lot. It's a tough teaching in our society today where we think, well, that's just wrong. You can't have that perspective. But we come across over and over and over again the impact that unbelievers have on believers when believers are trying to develop a partnership and or a fellowship with them. Compromises have to be made in order to do that. We know this instinctively as parents. How many parents here would not be cautious about who your children play with? You're always paying attention to who your children are playing with and where they're allowed to go. It would have been right for Jacob to be concerned about Dinah and where she was going, and you're not supposed to go there and you're not supposed to play with these ladies. But she did. Wrong friends in the wrong places will have a negative impact on all of us, not just our children. It has an impact on us, even though we think it won't. If we seek fellowship with people of the world, we'll end up by reflecting the world. And not only that, we'll end up by compromising the message to please the world, which is a problem in many churches today. It's for this reason that the Apostle Paul instructs believers to not seek fellowship with unbelievers. Yes, we work with them. Yes, we have to relate to all those types of things. But we do not seek our deep friendships there. We do not seek to make adjustments in our lives in order to have friendships with people who have values that are very different than ours. When we do, we act foolishly and expose ourselves to danger. So the point here is, Dinah did this. Dinah acted foolishly because she was not acting in obedience to what she knew God expected of her. As a result of her being alone and where she should not have been, with who she should not have been with, the prince of the land, Shechem, who was the most honored of all his father Hamor's house, saw her and desired to have her. Very powerful, influential man in the land who had authority, decided he wanted her. Since he was a powerful and influential man, he was able to seize her and lay with her. He forced himself on her against her will, meaning that he raped her. We will soon see that he never, ever expressed remorse for this. I mean, think about that. In trying to develop a relationship with Jacob's family, knowing what they thought of it, at no time did he express remorse for it. It's not something that he thought was necessarily wrong. He only sought to use it as a way to purchase her as his wife. So he didn't deal with the sin of it. No recognize of what he's done and the humiliation or anything like that. Just, okay, it's happened. Let me give you some money so I can have her as my wife. This was the thinking of a pagan informed by pagan gods. He had vastly different values. We shouldn't be surprised when unbelievers act as unbelievers. And we expose ourselves to that when we do what God's told us not to do, which is to seek fellowship with them. It's the same with unbelievers today who think there's nothing wrong with premarital sex, but that it's necessary in order to determine whether to get married or not. So, I mean, we might think about this and says, oh, he just considered rape as just a normal thing. It's just on the process to being able to, to be married. But we got to look at ourselves. How many people today, even people in the church, think, no, premarital sex is just a necessary process on the way to getting married today? People believe that. That's the world informing them. They're being polluted by the world. That's not God's ways. They say it's like trying on clothes or shoes before you buy them. That's the world's thinking. This reduces the other person to being an object meant for one's own personal gratification. Make them look good. I'll try you on for a little while, see how it works out for me, and if it works out good, then we'll get married. This is the thinking of an unregenerate mind who only cares for themselves. So the point is this: we need to be careful that we don't sit in judgment too much on Shechem for acting according in the ways of a pagan or an unbeliever, when we in our society do exactly the same thing. It again reinforces why we're not to have fellowship with unbelievers. And when we talk about fellowship, fellowship means partnership. It means a bond. It's not talking about not having anything to do with regards to relating or what. We have to do that at work. We're talking about close personal bonds. The type of bonds that require sacrifice in order to grow the relationship. Well, you can't do that with someone whose values are completely different than yours. Otherwise, you're going to be sacrificing the wrong thing. Their priorities and values are different than God's priorities and values. And ultimately, in our effort to try to develop the bond, it will draw us away from God. Well, this describes the situation with Dinah. She's not acting in a way that's consistent with what God expects of her at all. She's thinking the way that the pagans think. Based on the values Jacob received from God, this humiliated Dinah and brought dishonor on the whole family. You see the contrast here? Shechem doesn't seem to be overly concerned. Neither does Hamor seem to be overly concerned on this. But the opposite was true for Jacob's family. It humiliated Dinah and brought tremendous dishonor on the family. There's a huge contrast between believers and unbelievers right there. Dinah was no longer a virgin and thus would have no expectancy of what was considered a valid marriage. It impacted her for the rest of her life. Shechem's ways and values are revealed in how he acted after he raped Dinah. Normally, a man who rapes a woman is violent and harmful with no affection for her at all. In fact, afterward, it's common for him to have hatred for her and even kill her. She is only an object for his personal gratification. However, this was not the case with Shechem. He did not see anything wrong with this. He kind of mixed. He raped her, but then claimed that he loved her and spoke tenderly with her. It was normal. They put the two together. The passage tells us that his soul was drawn to Dinah, that he loved her and spoke tenderly to her. He acted in the opposite manner as one normally would, or often does do when they rape a woman. His love for her was such that he would be willing even to submit to significant pain for her. He was willing to submit to circumcision in order to have her. That's quite a sacrifice. So again, it seems that it was acceptable for a man in his society to force sex upon a woman before marriage and still love her. And again, there's parallels. Before we jump quick and we say, oh no, that can't possibly be true. We have the same combination of selfishness and the claim of love in our society as well. Somehow Jacob heard about this. He heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah. Dinah may have temporarily returned to tell him, or he may have heard it from one of the women from Shechem when he was wondering where Dinah was. Maybe all were talking about how Dinah and Shechem were now a unit. They were now together, and somehow word got back to Jacob. We don't know how he heard about it. But what we do know is that Jacob did nothing about it. Jacob did nothing about it. He remained silent, which of course led to all sorts of problems. He created a vacuum that the sons were all too willing to fill. He had the opportunity to lead and he didn't. Which brings us to the second way we often act when we're not looking to and relying on God, which was a problem that Jacob has had throughout his life. He acted fearfully. He didn't act in faith. He acted fearfully. Acting in faith would be doing the right thing and trusting God. But he didn't. He acted fearfully. It's not until the end of the narrative that we learn that Jacob was fearful. He was driven by his desire to maintain his reputation and security. And we'll come back to it at the end, emphasizing the me, I at the end. He wanted to keep the peace. He had the opportunity to confront the evil while his sons were with his livestock in the field, but he did not confront the evil. He wanted to maintain his relationship with the people of Shechem. He wanted to have peace and was willing to just remain silent and ignore the offense. And again, we may have trouble wondering how could anyone do this? But it's no different today. How often today do you have people that know that there's an injustice, have an opportunity to do something about it, but because of the potential personal cost to themselves, they remain silent? Oh, I don't want to get involved. We do the exact same today. We won't face or challenge injustice because of the personal cost that we might experience ourselves. Well, that's exactly what Jacob was doing here. That's made clear at the end of the passage with regards to what he was trying to preserve. God had already revealed to Jacob that they were not to marry foreigners. He knew that. He couldn't even begin to entertain the offer. He should have said no to marriage, and he should have immediately took steps to get Dinah back. God would have led through that. That's doing the right thing. Although we have no recording in Scripture up to this point on what to do in the case of rape, God had clearly revealed to them that it was wrong. For Jacob's sons would state in the passage, "For such a thing must not be done." They knew it was wrong. It was an injustice committed toward Dinah that needed to be rectified. It could not be ignored. And again, for us, we have to realize when we see injustice, that's always an opportunity to make a stand for the truth. And the reason why we often don't make stands for the truth in our society is because of the cost of doing so. We're guilty of exactly the same thing as Jacob was here. So we can't criticize him without at least looking at ourselves. Later in the Mosaic Law, God provided for either restitution in the form of payment or execution, depending on the circumstances. You can go to Deuteronomy 22, chapter 22 for that. Jacob did not know this at this time. He did not have the law at this time. But since God promised to care for Jacob in his camp, he should have inquired of God for guidance and or intervention. He would have revealed it to him. He would have intervened. Again, we have to remember, if we're going to sing songs and we're going to talk about how God is in control and how we can look to him, then we need to make sure that we call out to him with the confidence that he will act. If we don't and we rely on ourselves, it has to come from a lack of confidence in him. We have a living God who knows all things and cares for us, and we can go to him in our time of need, and he will respond. Jacob should have. God would have responded. God was speaking to Jacob. It's not as if God speaking to him was a new thing. He knew that God was with him. He knew that God cared. He should have went to him, but he didn't. Fear, not faith. Fear ruled the day in his life. And it was because of his inactivity that he created a vacuum of leadership that would be filled by Dinah's immature and zealous brothers. They were filled by those who did not. They weren't the ones given the responsibility to lead. Oh, there's a message for us, even in the church, men. You don't lead. There's others that are willing to fill the void. Others that don't have the same spiritual maturity or calling. Jacob had a responsibility to lead, but because he didn't lead, the brothers felt we needed to do something about it. And they were right. They needed to do something about it. But they did not either, like Jacob. They weren't relying on God either. Jacob was relying on his fear. They were being dictated to by their anger. Two opposite ends of how not to deal with injustice. This situation has much in common with a later event where one of David's daughters, Tamar, was raped by her half-brother Amnon. Because David did not show leadership in confronting it, one of Tamar's brothers, Absalom, did. He took matters into his own hands and killed Amnon. This resulted in a loss of reputation and security for David. He was later humiliated by Absalom, and it led to catastrophe for Absalom. In the same way, Jacob's fear and complacency resulted in a risk of reprisal toward him, which is just the way it is when you deal with truth. And the tribes of Simeon and Levi would not inherit their own designated land. There would be consequences. And more, I'll finish with a bit more information on this at the end of the message. But Simeon and Levi suffered consequences as well. God still worked. God still accomplished his purposes through it. But there would be consequences as a result of not following him, consulting with him, relying on him, but only relying on themselves. So this brings us to the third way we often act when we're not looking to and relying on God. We often act out of, in fury. We're sinful people. We have hearts that need to be transformed by God. We do that in submission to God. But if we're not in submission to God, what's our heart going to do? We don't follow our hearts, as a lot of people say. That's just stupid. Because our hearts will lead us to acting out of anger. It'll cause us to seek revenge. We sin in our anger and give opportunity to the devil. And this is what happened because they were driven by their anger. It caused a desire for revenge. But if they were submitted to God and relying on God, they would not have done that. He would have prepared them to respond much differently. He would have intervened. Shechem asked his father Hamor to get Dinah for him to be his wife. As such, Hamor went out to Jacob to speak with him. Afterward, so again, Jacob did nothing, right? He didn't do anything. There's no recording of him doing anything even after talking initially with Hamor. Afterward, Jacob's sons heard about what happened and immediately came in from the field. They were, to say the least, furious. They were very, very angry at the injustice suffered by Dinah. They may also have had some anger toward Jacob for doing nothing, just as Absalom had anger toward David for doing nothing to protect Tamar or to seek justice for Tamar. Since Jacob would do nothing, his sons took over. Facing their anger, Hamor turns to negotiate with them. It's never good to try to negotiate people who are consumed with anger. They can't think straight. He tries to convince them that Shechem loves Dinah and wants to have her as his wife, as if somehow that's going to fix everything. He thinks it'll solve the crisis and cover for Shechem's sin, even though he doesn't even recognize it as sin, which is part of the problem. And again, we do this today when confronted with the sin of premarital sex. Instead of repenting for the sin, we think that getting married will cover for it. All fixed now. Getting married is right, but it does not cover for past sin. Only repentance for forgiveness does. And this is something Shechem didn't do. He did not repent. He did not acknowledge that what he did was unjust and offer some sort of restitution for that. He didn't. Only offered, I'll get married to her and I guess somehow that will make things right. To help convince them, he also offers to strengthen the relationship between their peoples through intermarriage, cohabitation, trade, and land ownership. He throws in some incentives to get them to be able to say yes, appeal to their desire for worldly things. Jacob's sons knew enough that they knew that they were forbidden to intermarry and dwell with those outside the promise, and that God would give them all the land for their own, not Hamor. As such, they could not even consider any of what was offered. They're most certainly right to refuse what was offered. It's what Jacob should have done at the very beginning. They had no intention, and this is the point. Rather than just telling them no, they didn't just say no and work on getting their sister back. They had absolutely no intention at all in negotiating with them or giving them anything that they want. Shechem also tries to convince them to agree to marriage by offering to give Jacob and Dinah's brothers whatever they ask of him, no matter how great a bride price, no matter how great the gift. Name the price, I'll give it to you, I just want your sister. And again, Shechem's offer of any price was irrelevant when marriage wasn't an option in the first place. But he wasn't told this. Thus, there was nothing Shechem could do to cover for the injustice of their sister being defiled. There's nothing. In fact, the author of wealth to purchase Dinah only inflamed the situation by making it appear that he was, quote, treating her like a prostitute, which is how the passage ends. It's at this point that Jacob's sons, having decided, no, there's absolutely nothing. They only had revenge in their minds. They weren't thinking about what God wanted. They were only thinking about what they wanted. They had their own ideas of justice, which is why God tells us to leave vengeance to him, because we're not good at it. So it's at this point that Jacob's sons took a page out of Jacob's book by resorting to deception. We'll get it by cunning. We'll get what we want by cunning. They would capitalize on Shechem's desire for Dinah to exact revenge while thinking it was justice. And we have an awful weird way sometimes of justifying the evil that we do in the name of good. It is stunning to think that Jacob was actually present and remained silent for all of this. He was there for the negotiations. He just let his sons, who were furious, take the lead in it. He listened to everything and did not interject at any time because he was afraid. He completely abdicated his responsibility and left it up to his sons. You know, when we are fearful, we end up by justifying a lot of things. It's what fear does. But now what we're going to see is what fury does. Fear produces nothing good. Now we're going to see that fury produces nothing good either. In order to deceive Hamor and Shechem, they used the covenant of circumcision given to Abraham as a sign of faith in the promise to deceive them into thinking that if they were circumcised, they could agree to their offer. They polluted the spiritual symbol of life by suggesting they could include the faithless in the promise of God, all just to satisfy their anger. They showed a complete lack of regard for the things of God by perverting God's covenant in order to commit evil. When we have so set our minds on what we want to do, we often will cherry pick or look in the Bible to try to justify that sin. Well, here they completely twisted and perverted this incredible, beautiful covenant that God made with Abraham in order to deceive, not to give life, not to offer life. We have examples of this throughout human history. So many have been forced to profess faith or willingly profess faith when there is no faith in order to get what they want, including a wife or a husband. After this, they then created a false sense of security with them by making them believe that if they would not be circumcised, they would take Dinah and be gone. They made it look like they were a people of peace who would not take further action. That was part of the deception. We'll see that in a few moments. Hamor and Shechem fell for it. They fell for the deception. They were pleased with the conditions set by Jacob's sons because Shechem delighted in Dinah. This is where deception often works best, isn't it? When it capitalizes on sinful desires. We're often deceived in our pursuit of sin or things that we should not have. Shechem did not delay to do the thing and immediately set out to convince the rest of the men of the city to comply. Everything was so that Shechem could have Dinah. Everything. That was the complete and full motivation. He had great sway with the people, for he was the most honored of all his father's house. He gathered the men of their city at the gate and told them that Jacob's household was at peace with them and thus should be allowed to dwell in the land and trade in it, and that they would be able to intermarry. The only condition was that they had to circumcise themselves. As added incentive to convince them, he told them that this would result in them being able to claim their livestock, their property, and all their beasts as theirs. This reveals that Hamor and Shechem were also being deceptive with Jacob's sons. For by getting Jacob to dwell with them, their intention was that they would absorb Jacob into their society and take ownership of all their possessions. Remember the part of the passage where it says, "Be one with us"? They were also being deceptive with their own people, for they did not tell the men that this was to get Dinah as his wife, or that they promised that Israel could own property. They didn't tell them any of that. They just simply appealed to what? Their desires for worldly things. The men fell for the deception, and every one of them was circumcised. Just one sin leads to another. Because they believed that Jacob's sons were at peace with them, and this is important, they were confident, they felt secure, it said. Because they believed that Jacob's sons were at peace with them, they did not take any protective precautions against attack while they were incapacitated. There was no defense at all for quite a while. On the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, likely accompanied by servants by others, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They had completely deceived them. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. So we see here that they had actually kept Dinah with them. In their fury, they exacted revenge, thinking it was justice. It was not only Shechem that they killed. I mean, remember when the angels were talking, when the Lord was talking to Abraham and they were talking about Sodom and Abraham was pleading with him? Oh, is everyone going to die on the account? Like if there's 10 people there, will you spare the city? And the point here is that God does not. Jacob knew this. God is just. He does not cause people who aren't deserving to pay the price. They deserve it. Well, that wasn't the case here at all. The other men didn't deserve to die because of what Shechem did. Not at all. They knew that. They would have known the story. They would have known what the Lord had revealed to Abraham. And they acted completely contrary to it. They killed every male in the city. In their attempt to achieve justice, they committed a greater injustice. Their sin was greater than Shechem's. Their sin was greater than Shechem's. They were guilty of a greater injustice than what happened to Dinah. And this is simply the nature and problem with revenge, because it comes out of sin, which means it only produces sinful results, evil results. It perverts justice. It perverts justice. Mankind cannot act justly by taking revenge, which is why we must leave vengeance for God. God will repay, not us. For the men of Shechem, pretending to have faith in God by being circumcised did not give them what they desired. They got exactly the opposite. They didn't get what they desired any more than taking communion, getting baptized, going to church, and doing good works will save those pretending to have faith today. Circumcision was to be the result of having faith. Today, we do things like we take communion, we're baptized, we go to church, and we do good works, not as a replacement for faith, but because we have faith. Those things don't save us. We are saved by faith. And then God prepares for us good works to do. But Jacob's sons, they just simply use this beautiful picture of salvation through circumcision by faith in order to deceive them so that they could just simply kill them. It didn't produce anything. It wouldn't produce anything. After the slaughter, they took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. Again, this reveals that Hamor and Shechem were negotiating while keeping Dinah. It could very well have been if Jacob had said, "No, I want Dinah back," and they resisted. Okay, well then, yeah, God may very well lead them to go in and take her back. Justice would have been delivered through doing what is right. But this causes us to wonder if Jacob's sons would have been able to secure her return if the men of Shechem refused the condition to be circumcised. A battle to rescue her may very well have been necessary. They wouldn't have had to resort to deception. They could just demanded what was right. Either way, Jacob's sons got what they wanted, or at least got what they think they wanted. They took the revenge and got Dinah back. As evil as Jacob's sons were in their revenge, the reality is that Dinah did indeed, at least from her perspective, receive justice. Not the way God would have delivered it, but she did. In fact, her name means vindicated. It means judgment. It does not mean that the ends justify the means, but it's another reminder that God's plans are still accomplished in spite of the methods sinful man employs. Sinful man will experience the consequences for his sin, but it doesn't get in the way of God accomplishing his purposes in protecting, in this case, Dinah and Israel. In fact, as mentioned, they would experience consequences. Simeon and Levi would experience significant consequences for what they did. So God still used it, but it was wrong. And we talked before about how we can't follow God perfectly. We don't seek to do something like this. But if in fact God's plan's not thwarted in a situation like this, as evil as this is, then we can be absolutely confident that God's plan is not thwarted because of our weakness, because of our sinfulness. He will still accomplish his plan. It's just a whole lot better for us if we follow him rather than fight against him, or resist him, or rely on ourselves rather than rely on him. The sons of Jacob then proceeded to plunder the city. So instead of the men of Shechem being able to take all the possessions of Jacob, it was the other way around. Jacob took all their possessions, their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. So the men of Shechem thought that they would absorb Israel, but it was the other way around. The people of Shechem were absorbed into the camp of Jacob. Jacob was rightly angered at the actions of his sons, but it wasn't for the right reason. He wasn't angered by their sin. He was angered because he was fearful of his reputation and security. Look at the end. Look at the passage at the end. It says, "You have brought trouble on me." Where's the focus? Me. Making me stink to the inhabitants of the land. His reputation is damaged. If they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. Now, most certainly care for the household is important, but note that the response here was entirely selfish. That's what fear does. It's all about protecting self. That was the only reason he was upset at them, is because of the trouble of what they did would bring on him. The response of his sons was, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? Well, of course, the answer is no. They're emphasizing here what Jacob was ignoring, but at the same time, they're justifying how they dealt with it. For them, I guess the ends justified the means. Both Jacob's fear and his son's fury were starkly contrasting sinful responses to injustice. They were stark contrasts to injustice that were both sinful, equally sinful. We must not act in response to injustice with fear or fury. We must act to it in faith, doing what God has revealed to us to be right and true, and relying on him to reveal to us what we do not know. We must act with faith, looking to, trusting, and obeying God, which is something that God has been repeatedly correcting in the lives of the patriarchs up until this point in time, and will continue to. Dinah, Jacob, and Jacob's sons did not act in faith. A great injustice was committed. They are the victims of evil, absolutely. But they did not respond to the difficulties in faith. This is something that has to land heavy on us. Stuff's going to happen in our lives. Bad stuff is going to happen in our lives. But we have to ensure that our response isn't fear, our response isn't anger, fury. We have to make sure that our response is faith, that it's reflective of a trust and reliance on God and doing what we know that what God has already revealed to us to do in response. And then trust him with the rest. So again, Dinah, Jacob and Jacob's sons didn't act in faith because they were not focused on God. This resulted in Dinah having to live with the consequences of not being a virgin. Jacob having to live with the damaged reputation and the threat of retribution from the people of the land, not to mention the turmoil within his own family. And Simeon and Levi would not receive their own land in the promised land. Genesis 49, 5-7, when Isaac is giving, or Jacob is giving out the blessings, he says to Simeon and Levi, he says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Simeon would only receive a portion of Judah's allotment. Joshua 19, 1-9. Not his own. It's part of Judah's allotment. And although Levi would still be graciously used by God as the priestly tribe, there's another thing right there. Look at what Levi just did. And yet God still uses him to point as part of to make his tribe, the priestly tribe, to point to who? The Messiah. But then again, it won't be long before we look at the life of Judah either, who Jesus is ultimately a descendant of. He's guilty of sin as well. The point again is, we don't seek to sin. We don't look at this and go, oh, that's okay. God's going to use me no matter what anyways. The point is as we're walking in faith and as we're attempting to pursue righteousness, even though we go through times of failure and weakness, God does not forget us. God's ability to use us is not dependent on our goodness. It's dependent on His grace. As sinful as they were, God still acted in the midst of their sin to protect and preserve Israel. And just real quick, going back to Levi, note that he didn't, as the priestly tribe, they didn't receive an inheritance in the land. They relied on the rest of Israel to support them in their ministry. So as sinful as they all were, God still acted in the midst of their sin to protect and preserve Israel. As we'll see, the other people of the area did not come against them. However, we learn how important it is to look to and rely on God rather than ourselves. Although God will still use those of faith in His redemptive plan, acting foolishly, acting fearfully, and acting in anger will only produce grief and trouble in our lives. This is why I say it's so much better to trust God, because He handles it far better than we ever can. Matthew Henry writes this, alas, how one sin leads on to another, and like flames of fire, spread desolation in every direction. Foolish pleasures lead to seduction. Seduction produces wrath. Wrath thirsts for revenge. The thirst of revenge has recourse to treachery. Treachery issues in murder. And murder is followed by other lawless actions. Does that describe the kind of life any of us want to live? No. I mean, ultimately we want to find our joy, we want to find our happiness in the Lord. Well, that comes as we abide in Him. This here is not the life God intends for us. It's not the abundant life He wants for us. It's not a life of peace and joy and confidence in Him. Whenever we place confidence in ourselves, we rob ourselves of peace and joy. We don't find it. It is only when we look to God, rely on God, and obey God in all we do that we will have peace and joy in life. And the point that we take from this, regardless of the challenges we face, no matter how bleak the situation, no matter how evil the situation, we must resist the temptation to respond with our thinking and in our ways. We must not act fearfully. We must act in faith and be bold and speak the truth. And even if we have the truth, we don't act in anger or fearfully seeking to destroy and delivering justice ourselves. God has told us that He will handle it. He will deliver justice. So regardless of the difficulties that we face, it will turn out for good when we trust Him rather than ourselves. And here we get a picture of what it's like when we get it reversed, when we trust ourselves rather than look to and trust God.